the brain of all mammalian species that we've studied, without exception, contains the same amount of DHA and arachidonic acid. The same profile is consistent throughout all mammalian species today. The point really being is that you could not build a brain without it. Simple as that. DHA not only responsible for building the brain, they're also responsible for switching on brain genes. In 2005, the European Union carried out an audit of health costs, and brain disorders came top of the list at 386 billion euros.
This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Decentralized Radio. Today, we have Michael Crawford on the line. Michael is a professor at the Imperial College of London. He's the director of the Institute of Brain Chemistry and Human Nutrition, an expert in DHA and brain health and lipids. And I'm really excited for this conversation. And Michael and I have been talking back and forth the past few weeks. So it's great to finally meet face to face via the internet.
Yeah. By the way, I'm well retired, so I'm a visiting professor, not a standard professor.
Yeah, that's right. Visiting professor. I know every college is different with their designations, but that's really cool, and it's just exciting to talk to. I guess I would say the world expert in DHA and kind of the interactions with our brain. And this is something that I've read a lot of your papers, and this is something that has kind of come up in the health world quite a bit. It was profound for myself, actually, in my healing journey. So the reason why I got so obsessed with health is because I had one too many concussions, and using some DHA helped my healing journey quite a bit, upping that in my diet. So first-hand experience on the power of it. But really, I guess I wanted to start off with kind of the historical context, and we'll kind of dive deeper into this. But really, at a high level, there's this ongoing debate with anthropologists, scientists overall about how humans gained intelligence, consciousness, and really developed, large functioning brains in that prefrontal cortex. Many cite, fire as the inflection point, getting more calories for less effort from our diet. There's a whole slew of theories, but also one of them.
Smart by the time fire came, it was starting.
Yeah. So the question is, the question is DHA and seafood is another big theory, and I believe that's your perspective. And you've been quoted as saying the crucial point is that without a high DHA diet from seafood, we would have never developed, our large, highly conscious, intelligent brains. So Absolutely. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, the brain evolved in the sea between 500 and 600 million years ago. Now, the only thing that was available for the construction of its visual system, it all started with the visual system. Once the reign of the blue-green algae and all the rest of it was over, and there's enough oxygen to come into the environment, and air-breathing life started, the photoreception started with the trapping of a photon and converting it into electricity instead of converting it into carbohydrates and proteins. And we're pretty sure that the molecule that did this was docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA. we've got data from dinoflagellates, for example, which have an eye spot, and very similar to the what would have been one of the first single-cell systems that eventually evolved into the rest of the thing. And the dinoflagellate is stuffed full of DHA. And it not only has DHA with its eye spot, it also has a molecule which has got two DHAs in it, which is most unusual. And the only place you really find this in any significant quantities is in the eyeball, is in the photoreceptor of your eyes, my eyes, and everybody's eyes today. And there it was 600 million years ago. And we believe that it was actually the key to converting photons into electricity, which kick-started the evolution of the nervous system, which as things wore on and on and on and on, and you had the Cambrian explosion and so forth, the nervous system turned in one line into the central nervous system, which is our brain. Now, that all happened in the sea. Now, there were no land-based nutrients there at all. It was all marine stuff. The only stuff that could be used to build that new brain and nervous system was marine. And we know today that, and we demonstrated this back in 1971, that the brain of all mammalian species that we've studied, without exception, contains the same amount of DHA and arachidonic acid. The same profile is consistent throughout all mammalian species today. And with DHA performing this function in vision, we know about this, and in signaling systems in the nervous system today. So the point really being is that you could not build a brain without it. Simple as that. And so the only way you would have been able to get it in really large quantities that needed to power the epigenetic process to expand the central nervous system, the only place you'd be able to get it is at the seaside. You could get it from freshwater stuff as well, but the seaside would have been the most richest. And in those days, you have a pregnant lady. The men would go off hunting, perhaps, trying to find some meat or something like that. And all she had to do, heavily pregnant, would be to wander around the coastline and have a feast of seafood for free, with very little energy expenditure appropriate to even the last period of her pregnancy, when it becomes difficult for ladies to move about in great quantity, significant amounts. So it's just so logical, and it fits with all the other stuff that people have been talking about. Alistair Hardy, the physiology, human physiology, the fact that we're hairless, like the marine mammals, that we have a diving reflex, that we sweat, we have eccrine glands. Eccrine glands are really not a great idea if you're living on the savannas of Africa, for example, because in fact most of the savanna animals actually allow their temperatures to rise during the day and fall at night. And that is not what we do. We expend water to keep our bodies cool. And doing that in Africa, when I was working in East Africa, we discovered on safari on occasion where we got severely dehydrated. We're physiologists, Peter Wright. We took a journey into the hot safari and measured water loss. And we were losing water at 1.5 liters an hour.
Wow.
So, and funnily enough, the same number has come up by people who are interested in desert warfare, that the soldiers lose 1.5 liters an hour when they're operating in the desert. So it's the savanna, hot, dry savannas are not a hospitable place. And when you look at the brain evolution of all the animals that lived on the savanna, what you find is that the little ones, the hyraxes and things like that, have a very high brain to body weight ratio. And they can make DHA from the primary precursor, which is alpha-linolenic acid that occurs in green foods. And they can make it, but it's a tedious and long-winded, slow process to make it. Mm-hmm. And Andrew Sinclair and I showed this way back in the 70s, that it was really severely rate limited. And we did double isotope studies that shows that the efficiency of incorporating DHA into the developing brain was an order of magnitude greater than its synthesis from this parent. So when you move into the area of animals that start growing fast, the velocity of body growth and protein acquisition outstrips the ability to synthesize DHA. So what you find, and we reported all of this in the 70s, what you find is that these animals have in their liver stores and muscle stores and everywhere throughout the body very little DHA. They in fact have the precursor for DHA, but the last step is really they don't make it. So the fact of the matter is that these animals now have very small brains. You take a rhinoceros, for example, it gets all the protein it needs from the simplest food, namely grass, and it achieves a 1-ton body weight increment from birth in 4 years. But it only has about 350 grams of brain inside this huge body. So without exception, as animals' velocity of growth increased and they got bigger and bigger and bigger on the savannas, so brain size in relation to the body just simply plummeted. And that would not be at all good for Homo sapiens. So if you want to find some similar kind of high velocity of brain growth, the only place you'll find it is in the marine environment. You have the dolphin, there's 1.7 kilograms of brain, 1.7 kilograms of brain. It's actually got a bigger brain than we have. But it only uses half of it, of course, because one half has to sleep. Otherwise, if the whole brain slept, it would drown. So it only effectively uses 750 grams of brain at any given time. So, but the marine mammals are the only mammals on the planet that actually come anywhere near us with regard to brain capacity. And so the answer is that we simply had to have access to the marine food environment. And the way we describe it is that we evolved having the best of both worlds, the marine environment and the land-based food web.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education. Yeah, and to me, the dolphins, the orcas are prime examples of probably the most, I guess, sentient beings aside from ourselves, the most intelligent innately, that are also very large. So that, to me, that makes a lot of sense. But I guess the question is, what differentiated us to mammals like that and other species in the marine world? Like how did we accelerate to such a level of consciousness? Was it just this combination of a high DHA diet plus just getting out of the water and taking advantage of what's on the land, like you're saying, kind of this perfect storm? And of course this is, we don't know anything for certain, but I'd imagine it was kind of a multifactorial approach with DHA as kind of the foundation, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are other things in the marine food web that are absolutely critical for brain evolution and maintenance, and that is all the trace elements. Iodine is the best example. Iodine deficiency causes severe mental retardation. Um, the zinc, selenium, copper, and manganese and iron as well are used in enzyme systems that are responsible for protecting the brain against oxidative damage and protecting DHA in particular, because DHA is very sensitive to peroxidation. The richest sources of these trace elements, again, are in the marine food web, particularly in the filter feeders like mussels and oysters and things like that. So it's not just DHA that you get that's of importance in the marine food web, but then the land-based food web comes into it as well, because there's a substance called arachidonic acid which you get in meat, and it is a co-brain builder with DHA, and so in fact we getting the best of both worlds. The marine mammals have a difficulty in getting hold of arachidonic acid for the brain. Arachidonic acid is not involved in the signaling system. It's involved in the astrocytes, which are, there are many astrocytes in the brain as there are neurons, but the astrocytes are responsible for maintaining myelin and looking after the whole of the brain, in fact, and making sure that the neurons are properly fed and looked after, etc., etc. So the astrocytes were, in fact, a limiting factor so far as the arachidonic acid was a limiting factor as far as the marine mammals were concerned, which had plenty of stuff for all the signaling that was going on, which is what DHA does. But using both land and marine resources in a balance of roughly 1-to-1, using that enabled Homo sapiens to uniquely develop this huge brain.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And something also I think about perhaps is our access to the sun. Just if we left the water, and then we're getting, that direct sun exposure as well. And like you mentioned, the ability for DHA and the ability for the dinoflagellants to capture the photonic energy, which I believe back, during the Cambrian explosion, the UV exposure was pre-Cambrian explosion. The UV was far higher, right? Because there's
now that's an important point. That's a very important point, because I didn't mention it, but thank you for mentioning it. There was no ozone layer, of course, in the Vendian of the early Cambrian, and so yes, the life was exposed to the full UV from the solar radiation, and interestingly, that docosahexaenoic acid DHA that we talked about as capturing the photons, it absorbs in the ultraviolet. So it's totally consistent that DHA was the original chromophore. And when the ozone layer formed and things changed after what is called the Cambrian explosion, when that happened, of course, nature had to find another solution for photoreception, which she did with vitamin A. But DHA is still in there, as it is still a major component in phototransduction. And in fact, we've just got a paper coming accepted for publication in Entropy, in which we are discussing this whole issue about the DHA is functional in the last transfer of the energy from the photon into electricity that is transfers the information to the brain.
Yeah. And that gets me really excited. And I mentioned to you as well that I want to dive into that, but I want to stay maybe higher level for now, and then go into the quantum biology aspect of it later, which is really what I get excited about. But here we are, and we've left the sea. We now have this perfect environment for developing consciousness, developing brains that are capable of that. And then we see this continued growth in brain size up until maybe a few thousand years ago, the modern hunter-gatherer. And then we see kind of this strange reduction in brain size to where we are today. And that's something that's always piqued my interest. And I asked you this question over email before I even realized that you had just kind of published a book on this exact topic called The Shrinking Brain, which is so incredible. So does this have to do, you think, with the reduced consumption of DHA and these other cofactor nutrients? Or is it just
it's almost certain
result?
It's almost certain that's the case. I mean, Lee Broadhurst was one of our co-authors, considers that the really critical point was the development of land-based agriculture and the domestication of land-based mammals. It's interesting because you see that the chimpanzee has got about 340 cc's cranial capacity, and that's where we started from. And so there was this huge pressure of nutrients that were DHA not only responsible for building the brain, but it's also responsible. The group in Szeged in Hungary has shown this. They're also responsible for switching on brain genes. Mm-hmm. So it actually is double whammy because it's actually helping to expand the brain by switching on the genes that are important for its growth and development, as well as building the signaling systems that enable you to see, think, downstream, do all the things that we do, and for our cognition and so on. So it's really a very simple concept that DHA was responsible for the signaling systems and arachidonic acid for supporting the nutrition of it and everything. So we come round to the HERTO, which is about 160,000 to 200,000 years ago. And cranial capacity of the people in HERTO was about 1,450 cc's. And for quite a long time, I thought, well, that's pretty big, and it's even a little bit bigger than what we have today. But when you come down to Cro-Magnon, this is 28,000 to 32,000 years ago. It's a completely different story. You've got reports of cranial capacities between 1,500 and 1,700, the size of dolphins. 1,700.
And today we're at 1,300?
Today it's 1,336. That's the average. And this is a very significant loss. And it has to be because we've turned ourselves away from this dependence on the marine food web. Don't forget that if you think about us in poor old Britain, we're an island nation, and our islands and the whole history, Rule Britannia, etc., and the empire for what it was worth was all built on the fishing ships, all started from the fishing ships. Queen Elizabeth, in her day, Queen Elizabeth I, 50% of her income came from the cod and the fishing. And this is all gone. And you can pick up a sort of a detective story today about the islands of Scotland and so on. And what you find is them talking in these detective stories about that it once was a fishing port, once was a fishing village, once was. And it's all around the UK, once was. And we forget because people have short memories, and also young people don't know. I'm old enough to remember that when we went for a posh meal in a restaurant, we always had a 4-course meal. We had something to begin with, a starter, then we had a fish course, then we had a meat course. And that reflected, in a sense, our evolutionary history. And that's all gone. And funny enough, the starter, prawn cocktail was always my favorite starter in those days. But and we used to have fish for breakfast. We'd have herring or something of that sort. Not every day, of course. But and even the land-based food was much better produced. And said, you take chickens for argument's sake. Chickens, as I mentioned, these small mammals can make DHA. Chickens can make DHA, but they only can make it if they get access to the green food and the slugs and other things that eat the green food. And we were asked in 1972 by the Royal College of Physicians, when Jerry Shaper was doing a report on diet and heart disease, and we were asked to do some analysis of food at the time. And so we measured the DHA and all that, and arachidonic acid, and the amount of fat and saturated fat, etc., in a whole bunch of foods for them. And chickens in those days had 170 milligrams of DHA per 100 grams of food. In 2000, and I think it was 2002 or thereabouts, there was a meeting, a scientific meeting, and one of my staff thought it would be a good idea to present some data on modern composition of foods. And he analyzed chickens, and there was only 25 milligrams, down from 170. And more recently, we had ITV, we had a lot of television interest in BBC and a whole bunch of television people doing programs on this fall in the DHA content of chicken meat. And later, more recently, we measured it for ITV, and it was down to 13 milligrams. Now, this is very elementary because, of course, 95% of the chickens eaten today are produced in factories.
Yeah, eating soy.
They don't get any access
soy and corn.
Food.
Yeah.
All they're fed is corn or something similar. And so that's just one aspect of it. Now, if you take the fish landings in 1950, the fish landings in the UK were about 1 million tons of fish were landed by our fishing fleet. And incidentally, during World War II, the only thing that wasn't rationed of the major food products was fish and seafood. Fish and seafood were never rationed. Meat, butter, and milk, not milk, but meat, butter, and all that kind of stuff was heavily rationed, but fish and seafood were not. By 1950, after the war, we landed 1 million tons of fish into the UK. 2019, it was down to 600,000 tons. But there was an increase of population of 30%. That means the per capita landing was down by 40% in this short time from 1950 to 2019. And during this time, you would ask, does it matter? And you look at the work done by the University of Bradford, and what they show is that IQ has been falling consistently since 1950. So we're in serious trouble.
Yeah, to me, it's an alarming trend that we're consuming far less DHA, far less nutrients, especially with the modern food system. But something I'm curious about, because we're talking about this brain size, and you give these data points of, 25, 30% higher brain capacity around 30,000 years ago compared to today. Early agricultural societies, Mesopotamia, things like that, started maybe 10,000 years ago. Is that brain size, has that been kind of the same, the brain capacity for the past 10,000 years, or has it continued to go down since 10,000 years ago, I guess, since the last ice age?
Well, I think I don't know. I mean, the data is just odd bits here and there, and it's not really sort of satisfactory. But the assumption is that really the turning point could have been started before we fully became agricultural, but the starting point was about 10,000 years ago when the people decided that enough was enough and couldn't be bothered with this hunting and gathering, and probably resources were diminishing on land as well, and so they developed agriculture and animal husbandry. That would, most people think that it was this turning point.
That makes sense. And I'm just asking because I still think there's a stark difference, as you're saying, maybe today compared to just a few hundred years ago. So I think we haven't even felt that full brunt. But what you're saying is IQ is continuing to drop. So is this something that's directly correlated, IQ and DHA consumption? And I believe it is for the mother, right? Yeah,
there's a ton of animal experimental evidence, right going back to the 1970s, and that a deficiency of DHA influences visual acuity in preterm and term infants, and that's where it was experiment studies were done, because there was a time when infant formula didn't contain any DHA. And DHA, of course, is a rich component of human milk. And so is arachidonic acid, incidentally. And human milk contains both of these fatty acids. So, it was quite an important issue that they had available to them the possibility to do studies of infants fed without these components of human milk, and infants where they added these components to the milk. And particularly the work, I like the work of Susan Carlson in Memphis and Eileen Birch and the Retina Foundation in Dallas, and there was Bob Gibson and McCrady's in Australia, and Stewart in Scotland, all showing the same thing, that especially in healthy preterm infants, if they didn't get the DHA, they lost. Eileen Birch talks about it, 1.5 liners of the eye chart visual acuity, which is quite significant. And they also lost certain cognitive measures as well. And there was a huge study that was done by Joe Hilpern at the National Institute of Health in America, in collaboration with Jean Golding in Bristol in England, called the Alsbach study, the Avon longitudinal study. And there was a study of 14,000 pregnancies. And what they did was to study what the mother during the pregnancy, and then they followed the children up to 8 years of age. And they found, after controlling for 27 different confounding factors, that behavioral scores such as verbal IQ, motor function, and social scores, things like that, were a straight line function depending on the amount of fish and seafood that the mother ate during the pregnancy. Straight line. The more she ate during the pregnancy, the better the outcome of the children in motor and behavioral scores at 8 years of age. This is the biggest, the longest observational study ever been done. And it is totally convincing, because there's no way you can get around it. People have been trying to dismiss the study, but it is just totally robust. And they're still working on the outcome of this today and finding exactly the same the study has never been shaken. It was published in 2007. But there's experimental data out in humans, infants, and animals galore to demonstrate links with cognition and vision.
That's a profound study, and I remember finding out about that and being extremely convinced. And I was trying to coerce my sister to eat as much seafood and DHA during her pregnancies. But it really is incredible. So I guess the priority is obviously for the pregnant mother to eat as much seafood, DHA as possible, but then as well, in the developing brain age, right? Just childhood in general, it would be really important to consume that as well, right? Is there kind of a priority there, or?
Oh yeah, I think that if you stop and think about it, let's see, they would have had a DHA trace element rich food
all the time. Yeah,
all the time, and the pressure. The epigenetic pressure for enhancement of neurodevelopment would have been present all the time, leading to this huge brain sizes of Cro-Magnon between 1,500 and 1,700 cranial capacities. We're now going in reverse. And it's not just IQ, because in fact, a lot of people say, Yahoo IQ is just a funny thing. But mental health has been escalating as well. And in 2000, let me get this right, in 2005, the European Union carried out an audit of health costs. They started in 2004. They published the data in 2005. And brain disorders came top of the list at 386 billion euros. Now, a lot of people said, oh, yahoo, this is all just due to clever psychiatric psychologists' definitions of
diagnoses,
new things. And so they did it again in 2010, and that came out at 789 billion euros, nearly double. And
isn't this something that you predicted in the 70s or the 80s?
We predicted this, absolutely. I mean, Graham Rose in the Sunday Times reviewed a book that my wife and I wrote called What We Eat Today in 1972. He said, unless we do something about caring for the nutrition of the brain, we're going to become a race of morons. This is on the 5th of November, 1972, an article by Graham Rose in the Sunday Times. So what we wrote in the book, which was obviously a distillation of the research work that we've been doing with Andrew Sinclair at the time, what we wrote in the book was pretty obvious to the fellow the layperson who reviewed it in the Sunday Times. And and the problem was that nobody's done anything about it. And you come to 2005, when the European Union did this audit and came up with brain disorders as top of the list, and repeat in 2010, you'd think somebody would do something about it. Well, we tried to do something about it. We got Lord Morris at the House of Lords to ask questions about it, Lord Warner, who was minister representing the Ministry of Health at the time, said, "Well, we don't know about the cost of mental illness," but he did admit that the cost of drugs in hospital for mental health since 1992 had escalated hugely. And give them credit, they did the numbers for the UK. And Jo Nurse at the Department of Health did the numbers, and she and her team came up with an audit with the cost of brain disorders, again like Europe, top of the list at £77 billion, 77 billion through the UK. Again, there was all this Yahoo business, it's just new diagnostic. So she did it again in 2010. And in 2010, the cost had escalated to 105 billion. The Wellcome Trust then weighted in as an independent. We've got to have an independent assessment of this. And in 2013, they reported a cost of 113 billion. It's just been going up and up and up. And nobody has done anything about it. It is astonishing that you have 4 governmental audits and 1 independent audit saying that brain disorders are the topmost concern in public health. And nobody does anything about it. It is inconceivable, totally inconceivable.
Are you self-employed or a small business owner and are tired of paying hundreds of dollars a month to centralized health insurance companies for minimal coverage because there is no alternative? Well, I have good news for you. There is. And this podcast is brought to you by CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a more decentralized alternative to health insurance, and it uses community and crowdfunding to help its members pay for emergencies when they do happen. They incentivize and prioritize health and personal responsibility and share the thought that you should really only be using the centralized healthcare system when emergencies do happen. This is what I am on board with, and I have personally signed up for CrowdHealth since I left the corporate engineering world and the medical benefits that come with it. If you want to learn more, you can check out our episode with CEO and founder Andy Schoonover, or you can head over to joincrowdhealth.com and use code DRADIO, DRADIO, when you sign up to get a discounted rate of only $99 for the first 3 months. Centralized healthcare is one of the biggest issues in our society today, and I really love what CrowdHealth is doing to provide an alternative for people who care.
Well, they're doing something, right? They're prescribing a bunch of medications to these folks. That's about all I can think of it. And it's really sad, right? Because we have this chronic disease epidemic, and a lot of it is in the neurological world. And there are, so much sound research out there about things like DHA, just the lack of connection to the natural world in general. But I want to stick on what folks can do, because what's recommended today is kind of very all over the board in terms of during pregnancy, during infancy of what you should feed your child. And there's this very obvious study that you're presenting 14,000 children that have been followed correlating IQ to seafood consumption, where most doctors would probably tell pregnant mothers to be very wary of seafood consumption due to mercury and other toxins and things like that. So what do you say to folks about that, about the concern for heavy metals and toxin exposure in seafood?
This is the Food and Drug Administration of the United States that came out with this. I better be careful about what I say.
Oh, you can speak freely on this show. Don't worry.
But it is a completely unscientific statement. And I'm convinced, and other colleagues of mine who've been working in the same field are totally convinced, Joe Hibben in particular, and Phil Spiller, who was of the FDA himself, is deeply concerned about this. Is wrecking the IQ of Americans, and it has a drip feed in places like the UK as well. It is extraordinary that they did not consider the evidence, simple evidence, from fish-eating communities. The Japanese ladies have been eating fish and seafood at practically every meal throughout the week. And they have given birth to the children that have grown up to have the best longevity and the least chronic, non-communicable diseases of Western industrialized countries. Where is the evidence of neurotoxicity? It is simply not there. It just is just a scaremongering. And
yeah,
scaremongering, we don't know the methods for it. And in fact, Dr. Hibber said in the 2007 papers I referred to that this advisory by the FDA will do harm. Now, the first thing any medical professional or anybody interested in human health, the first priority is not to do harm. Well, it's not the only priority by any means, but it is a first priority, is not to do harm. And this is doing harm. I mean, it's perfectly clear. There was a big meeting in the of NOAA in the Hawaii, funnily enough, several years ago, when a lady gave data to show that women in America were saying, "Oh, there's this toxic stuff in fish." They say you should only eat two fish a week or something. I'm not going to eat any. I know this is almost certainly being responsible for a number of children losing out on their full genetic heritage in terms of intelligence. And it is tragic. And Hilburn and Phil Spiller are busy writing papers trying to alert the general public to the falsehood of this advisory.
Yeah, I think it's quite ironic when they're the same administrations advising on other things that contain mercury to inject into children and other things like that. But who are we to question the FDA? But it could be a concern for some people. But there are easy ways. Sardines, salmons, mollusks, crustaceans. They have very low mercury levels anyway. I mean, not that many people are eating sharks and whales, which would have a lot higher content. But I think it's fascinating and something that also comes up quite a bit in the diet world and in general when you categorize omega-3s all together, which I think is very a wrong way to do it, because a lot of things have omega-3s, but not a lot of things have DHA, and then DHA in the correct form. So I kind of want to get into that a little bit. You mentioned earlier about alpha-linoleic acid or linolenic acid being very low conversion to DHA. So is it pretty much impossible to get sufficient DHA from a plant-based diet? Would you say?
It's not impossible, but you can get some. But the point is that we're not talking about trying to maintain what we've got. We're talking about the evolution and the forward thrusting that took us from 340 cc's cranial capacity to 1,500 to 1,700. It's that sort of thing is a totally different ball game for you and I to keep what we've actually got. And yes, you can. It's possible to make some DHA from alpha-linolenic acid, but there are different genetic capabilities. Tom Brenner in Austin has shown this very clearly, that some genes allow for better conversion than others. Mm-hmm. And so that means that some people are better than others in making these things. In India, for example, you have huge vegetarian communities, and they do better at making DHA. But India has the highest prevalence of low birth weight and preterm births on the planet. Mm. And they're all inland people. You go to the fishing villages in Kerala, and you don't see any of this problem. You don't see any goiter. You don't see any iodine deficiency. And you see very little of this preterm birth and low birth weights in the fishing villages and fishing communities. And the same in Indonesia, where I did some work with the Indonesian government in the early 1990s. The same story. 60% of the school children inland had palpable goiter, but none in the fishing villages. And the Indonesian government at the time, with Salwan Kayati, the Ministry of Health, was concerned about the fact that the low intelligence of a lot of the people in Indonesia, because of he had identified it, that the reason for it was because of this lack of fish and seafood. And the solution that we came up with was to grow kelp, because it's difficult to transfer in a hot, humid country. It's difficult to transfer fish inland unless you've got refrigeration, and a lot of the places they don't have that kind of thing. So, but they dry fish, but kelp, of course, can be dried, and it contains all this stuff as well as the trace elements, and it can be used not only for food, it can also be used to feed the animals. And it can be used as fertilizer to put the iodine and other trace elements back into the soil. So they've done this now. A huge area. And it's absolutely huge where they are growing kelp. And it's interesting because the kelp farmers are making more money than the inland farmers, because they're exporting a lot of it to places like China and Japan and so on.
So getting DHA from the ALA conversion is not realistic, but if you do eat kelp, it could provide some amount of DHA. So what if we fed like all our lamb like large amounts of kelp? Would they have way more DHA then, and their fat?
Yeah, funny enough, there's a Scottish island, I can't remember which one it is, where the sheep were the feral sheep were excluded from the inland farming community by building walls and things like that. And the sheep are dependent on grazing what little grass there is left for them, and the seaweeds, and they actually have more in their liver. We studied it. Yes, it's perfectly possible. It's in fact, this takes us into a completely other, different realm, because it takes us into the solution for the reverse evolution of the brain. It takes us into the solution for reversing mental ill health and reversing all these brain disorders, and that is to start farming in the sea, to start reversing the decline in the fishing communities. This is what the Japanese have been doing. Between two islands off Okayama, they have a huge area where on land we plant grass pastures for cows, sheep, and so on and so forth. And what Dr. Takahiro Tanaka has been doing between these islands is to plant marine grasses. And so he has marine pastures in places where the whole ecology of the seabed had been destroyed by trawlers. They were just sort of muddy flats and so on. And he's now got huge areas of marine grass, and this provides for the young fish to develop, and the vegetarian fish provide food for them, of course. And he's planted marine artificial reefs. He has 7 target species, and of these 7 target species, they studied the ecology of the reproductive behavior. And so he has got 7 targets, artificial reefs that are designed to enhance the surface area in the marine environment in an ecological way that is consistent with the reproductive pattern of the individual species. For example, one of the species likes going into holes. So he's got a reef with a whole lot of holes in them, and planted in the area where they were mostly doing their reproduction. And he's trebled fish productivity, and he's got oyster rafts and mussels and all the rest of the follows in that. And this is the way to go. Foresight produced a report for government a few years ago, and they said that there is no more land available for arable use. In fact, arable land is diminishing because of expansion of urbanization. And they ask for more intensive use of what agricultural lands that we have. But with population adding another billion in a 10 years' time, we have to find a solution. And the solution has got to be the oceans. We've got to start farming in the oceans like the Japanese are doing. And the Chinese have been doing it for donkey's years. And of course, the Indonesians are showing the way forward with this huge, vast area of kelp production.
So the idea is the marine grass farming will bring back more seafood populations that have been decimated from overfishing and trolling and things like that.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Absolutely. It's the same principle as feeding sheep and cows on land. It's exactly the same principle, but in the sea. And the marine, I have a video from Oman where I was an advisor to a research council for partner. The previous Sultan had said to us, I want to know what I'm going to do after oil. So I wrote a report for this, and it included a very simple statement that you've got desert on one hand and sea on the other. The answer lies in the sea. And they've already got 350 hectares of under artificial reefs. And they sent me a video of this. And after 2 years, it's incredible the amount of marine flora that has grown on these artificial reefs. It's just unbelievable. And it's just, this doesn't require like aquaculture, feeding fish or anything like that. It just requires enhancing the ecological conditions for improvement of the productivity of the marine system. It's simple. And it, of course, produces economic benefit from the restoration of the jobs for the people who were once fishing people.
I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's cool too because you could probably regenerate a underwater ecosystem faster than an above land one because just of the lifespan of fish is the reproduction cycles are much faster than say cattle or sheep, etc. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But I want to get back to quickly just the type of DHA in food. So something that has been kind of coming up more and more and that I've learned about is the importance of DHA being in the SN2 position for proper absorption, utilization in the body. Can you maybe talk about what the positions, the SN positions are at a high level, and then where do we find that? Obviously in seafood, I believe is most common, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is nature, and nature has rules. They're basically based on physics and chemistry. And the cell membrane, which organizes this external structure and interface with the environment, and the internal structures of the powerhouse, the mitochondria, the reticular endothelium, where proteins are synthesized, the nuclear envelope, and all like that, are made up with membrane lipids, 2 layers of lipids. And these are phospholipids, phosphoglycerides. And the fact of the matter is that you have 2 positions in the phosphoglycerides, SN1, which is in the outer, and SN2, which is, so to speak, in the middle. And nature, you ask her why she did this, but nature decided that the SN2 would be occupied by an unsaturated fatty acid, whereas SN1 would be occupied by a saturated fatty acid. So what you see is that in all the cell membranes, the lipids that are make up the membrane you have polyunsaturated fatty acids in the SN2 position and saturated fatty acids in the SN1 position. And it's as simple as that. So that all food you get that has been produced by nature, such as everything that's in the marine food web, and all the land-based food as well, will have, if you eat from the animals, you will get exactly the same SN2 with polyunsaturated fatty acids and SN1 saturated. And of course, DHA is polyunsaturated, if you like, the head of the polyunsaturated group with 6 unsaturated bonds. And it is always in the SN2, except, with one exception, in the photoreceptor, where there's so much of it, it actually creeps into the SN1 as well, and you get di-DHA. I think I mentioned this di-DHA, which you actually find in the dinoflagellates, which is a representative of what might have happened 600 million years ago to your own eyeball. That's the only place really to find DHA in the SN1 position. It's in both, but it's predominantly in the SN2.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think again the takeaway is to eat whole food sources of DHA, omega-3s. But this kind of leads me to another important topic, and you mentioned this earlier about refrigeration being needed for seafood transportation. And I believe that's because these, PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, such as DHA, they're very easily oxidized. And this is something that I'm very interested in talking about and hearing your perspective, because, consuming seafood, you can do it many ways. A lot of the folks that we seem to be referring to here as doing it the right way in Japan eat seafood raw. So how does cooking affect the availability, the oxidation of DHA? Is it best to eat it raw? And then tying this in to fish oil supplements, which are often touted and kind of sitting on the shelf, potentially rancid due to this oxidation. So yeah, your thoughts on that as well.
Well, yeah, one of the good things about some of these big fishing ships is that, in fact, they process the fish as caught. And a lot of the processing ends up with large quantities of frozen fish, frozen cod, for example, frozen cod steaks. That is as good as eating it straight out of the ocean. There's no question about it. I mean, there's a length of time you can keep it frozen, but I mean, for a month or so, it's not a problem. And so there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's hugely beneficial to have frozen stuff because, as you quite rightly say, fish is very quickly rancidifies. But cooking is important from the point of view in case there are any parasites that might be in the wild caught stuff. It doesn't really affect the DHA concentration that much. And so I wouldn't worry. The point about fish, of course, is it hardly needs any cooking at all. I mean, we get a lump of cod, put it in the frying pan, and one of the reasons for this is nice to have the skin a little bit crispy, and 2 minutes is cooked. And it would be quite nice to pour a little bit of white wine on it or something to just make a sauce. But the cooking of fish, it cooks it more or less cooks itself. It hardly needs any cooking at all. And the shorter the cooking time, the tastier it's going to be anyway.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you think about fish oil supplements and potentially being rancid or not being indicative of the whole food source?
Well, the thing is, this you can you can tell whether it's if you buy it in capsules and you bite on the capsule, you'll soon tell whether the stuff is good or rancid. I use fish oil straight from the bottle because you know perfectly well whether this is rancid or not. Because if it's rancid, it'll really hurt the back of the throat. So, but in terms of how good are supplements? Because supplements are okay. They are not a replacement for fish and seafood because they don't have all this other accessory nutrients that are so important. But they are better than nothing, so to speak. And I think the important thing is that there isn't any point in having these supplements and then going out and having a fast food full of junk and all that kind of stuff at the same time. It really, for health, you need to have a holistic approach to what's being eaten, and not just this. The supplements are better than nothing, as I said, but they don't replace the real stuff. And of course, a lot of the studies that have been done to demonstrate cognitive and other functional aspects of the neurological system have been done with supplements. So they can be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I think it helped me in my brain injury recovery, and I tried to find the highest quality brand I could, but now I'd rather just eat it from the whole food source. And I think the same discussion goes for farmed fish versus wild caught fish. I think there's a spectrum of farmed fish. Obviously, some of them are pretty abysmal in quality, but they're starting to pop up more and more higher quality fish farms, and probably average farm fish is better than no fish, right? So do you share that same perspective, or what do you think about farm fish and how that plays into, I guess, the greater role of getting more of the population to eat seafood with the sustainability issue?
Well, I think the aquaculture, development of aquaculture has made a huge contribution to health. The problem really is that it's not the answer at the end of the day. The real answer is to use the natural system and just enhance it. The problem with aquaculture is, as I'm sure you're well aware, you have to feed the fish. And they've run out of the wild fish and wild fish offals. But hang on a minute. This idea of farming in the oceans would produce not just enhanced productivity, but of stuff to eat. To also produce tails and heads and a lot of offal that could be used for aquaculture. But at the moment, they have a problem, and they've been using chickens and I believe chicken feathers, and I believe also they are using vegetable oils. And they say, oh, it doesn't matter because we use the vegetable oils and then just before we're going to harvest them, we add fish oils. That changes, but it's not the same by any means. They've been losing out on the DHA content, as far as I'm told, quite significantly. But if we were to develop some of our coastline, in the UK we have this, our island nations, we have this massive coastline. We have a lot of islands that became depopulated with the diminishing fish catches and things like that, and depopulated for other reasons as well. And a lot of places that were fishing ports that are no longer. Edinburgh, take Edinburgh, for example. Leith used to be the most wonderful fishing port. It's now a sort of a popular habitat for one of the royal family's ships or something like that as a museum. And it's no longer the wonderful fishing port it was in the days of my youth, because the Firth of Forth has been destroyed. And we've really got to get to grips with this kind of thing, stop the nonsense of polluting the seas and reversing our fish consumption by developing the coastal resources.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of innovation could really proliferate the space, and it's there for the taking, I think. There's definitely a fleeting fish supply, wild caught, and it's becoming very expensive for people to buy high quality fish. That's what I realize, and it's hard for me, especially being inland. I buy, pasture raised beef and lamb locally. It's really high quality, but like we talked via email, that people who would have lived inland, they would have been catching freshwater fish, and freshwater fish are even worse because all the rivers and the streams, and they're super polluted. So I think the fish farming kind of industry, if it cleans up its act, could be really helpful for societal health. And I guess that would be kind of one of my last points here for this part, is talking about freshwater fish consumption and farming, and your work. You've done some work on conservation and pollution of the environment in general, and for decades ago, and things haven't gotten much better, unfortunately. They have in some places, but I think we still have a long way to go, right?
We have really, I was going to use a rude word about it, but we've really messed up our coastal waters to its disadvantage. I mean, when I was at school, I was at school in a monastery in the north of Scotland, and the monks would go out and catch salmon for Friday dinner. And at Port Augustus, there was a canal, and whenever an American boat was seen entering the Grand Canal during the war to avoid being shot at by the German submarines, the Tom-Toms would beat out the message, and the monks would take the boat out and catch salmon. They would put anything below 25 pounds back in the water. And they would catch a fish, and they would hold it up as American boat get caught in the locks at Port Augustus, and swap it for American cigarettes. I mean, the lock was just full of fish, and the rivers were full of fish. And it's all gone. And it's absolutely tragic what we've done with the pollution and the overfishing as well. When I was a child, my father used to take us to Cromarty to celebrate something or other, and he was always great for celebrating things. And Cromarty was renowned for its fresh seafood. It was in the mouth of the Almond River going into the Firth of Forth. And when I came back from Africa in 1965, I mean, that the proprietor at that time used to get the reason why it was so popular was he would gather the seafood fresh from the Firth of Forth in the morning for people to have for their dinner in the evening. So in 1965, when I came back from Africa, I said to our family living in Edinburgh, let's go on a trip down memory lane. And we drove down to Cromarty, walked. It was July, a beautiful day. Walked to the foreshore to have a look at this wonderful bridge, the big iron bridge, and we were greeted with a brand new Department of Environment notice: danger, mussels unfit for human consumption. There's no more fresh seafood in the Cromarty. In my lifetime, the Firth of Forth has been destroyed from a once rich food resource to something that is now so dangerous. The vets tell dog walkers to keep their dogs on leash if they're walking around the coastline in case they eat poisonous seafood. This has happened in my lifetime. It is absolutely awful.
That's so heartbreaking to hear, really. I mean, it's just, tragic. It's an understatement. It's unacceptable on all fronts. Is that due to just chemical industry? What was the cause of that, or what's the main cause in the UK? I know in the US, it's a whole slew of industrial plants and runoff, military, everything.
Oh, it's industrial. It's in sewage, untreated sewage. It's and farming as well as runoff from farming, causing
herbicides, pesticides, glyphosate. Yeah, everything.
A whole bank shooting match. I remember we lived in a place called Barnton, just on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and the River Armouth used to go around the bottom of a field, a farm, on the other side of the wall of our garden. And my father and his friends used to go down and fish in the river. And then they built a paper factory. And the paper factory started using the water from the River Arm to clean out all its stuff. And it was killing all the fish.
Mm.
And this is the sort of start of it. This was once rich river was killed by a paper factory.
Yeah, I mean, there's just countless examples of this, and it's so sad. But, I think if there is deliberate effort to clean these areas up, the ecosystem can recover, and we've seen that in a few cases. So there is optimism. It's just we just need to make this a priority, and the oysters and other filter feeders are kind of good ways to start that process. And the nature is resilient. We just need to give it a chance.
I totally agree with that. Yes, we've just got to do it. And I mean, the Japanese are doing it, the Chinese are doing it, the Indonesians are doing it, and there are other examples around the world and in America as well, where people are actually turning to the marine environment for the next generation of food production. And it requires cleaning up our act. And in fact, in the Declaration of Manila in 2012, there was one, I think there was two declarations, one 2008, 2012, was in fact for the far eastern countries to clean up their pollution. This was built into the Declaration of 2012. So people are conscious of it, and people are doing things about it. But we need to accelerate it, and particularly in the UK, we could become self-sufficient in food. There is a massive great coastline and lots of islands with pristine water all around them. They could be used for enhancing the ecosystem and taking benefit from it. And it not only does it provide food and food for the brain and heart as well, but it also helps ocean acidification and climate change. Because you start growing a kelp forest, it does the same as the Amazon forest. It fixes CO2. And the same, once you start enhancing the marine food web, you have to enhance the photosynthetic stuff. And what does the photosynthetic stuff do but suck out CO2?
Yeah, it's a win-win across the board, I think. So I would encourage anyone in your local legislation, whether you're the UK or the US or anywhere, I mean, make it a priority, right? Because you just heard how important DHA and the vital nutrients in seafood are for IQ, for brain development across the board. we want to continue this evolution in a positive direction, not have a de-evolution. And that only happens if we have seafood available to eat. So I would say, yeah, thank you so much for your work in this space. I think we'll maybe put a wrap on this part of the conversation. I think it's been fantastic, and we can dive deeper into the quantum biology side of DHA, which I definitely want to do. And yeah, I think it's a really important summary discussion for people to understand just how significant these nutrients have been in our evolution and now in our lives and our brain development and our cognition today.
Well, they should read our book, The Shrinking Brain.
That's right. So The Shrinking Brain, I think you just released it a few months ago. And that's discussing everything in this realm and the evolution of the human brain, from my understanding.
Yeah, and more than that, it also helps restore the importance of Darwin's concept with regards to the importance of the environment, which has been rubbed out in recent time.
Do you have a website for that, or is Amazon a good place to get it?
It's on Amazon. The book's on Amazon. Okay. We should get a website, but at the moment we're so busy with so many damned other things.
Well, you got so much good research coming out, and it's great to see this kind of still being worked on and being pushed as a priority. So we'll have to link that below. But yeah, thank you, Michael, and yeah, we'll have to continue this conversation. Thanks, everyone. Tune in for part 2, and we'll dive deeper into the quantum biology of DHA.